The tension in the congressional hearing room was electric, as cameras captured what was supposed to be a routine Judiciary Committee session. Instead, viewers witnessed one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent memory. Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, now serving as a special counsel for the committee's Republican majority, had been grilling witnesses all morning with her trademark aggressive style. But when Representative Jasmine Crockett's turn for questioning arrived, something unexpected happened. Bondi interrupted Crockett mid-sentence, leaning forward with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, you clearly don't understand how these proceedings work," Bondi said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should let the adults handle the complicated legal questions." The camera caught the flash of recognition in Crockett's eyes. This wasn't just a professional disagreement. It was a public attempt to diminish her credentials. What happened next left everyone in the room speechless. Within seconds, Bondi's expression transformed from smug confidence to visible shock as Crockett delivered a response so measured, so precisely researched, and so devastatingly effective that staffers behind the dais began exchanging wide-eyed glances. By the time Crockett finished speaking, even Bondi's strongest supporters couldn't hide their reactions. Behind the scenes, committee staff frantically switched between camera angles, capturing every moment of this historic exchange. The tension in the room was palpable as the seasoned prosecutor found herself in unfamiliar territory, completely outmatched on her own legal turf. This moment would soon become one of the most shared political clips in social media history, with millions of Americans witnessing how political discourse could change in an instant when preparation meets provocation. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping political confrontations that reveal the true character of America's most influential figures. Hit the notification bell so you never miss these historic moments as they unfold on national television. Pam Bondi, 59, had built her reputation as Florida's tough-talking attorney general before moving to Washington. Her rise to national prominence came during high-profile legal battles, where she developed a reputation for aggressive questioning and unapologetic conservative advocacy. After leaving the Florida AG's office, Bondi had served on former President Trump's impeachment defense team and later as a special counsel to congressional committees where her prosecutorial style made her a conservative media favorite, known for her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer wardrobe. Bondi had cultivated a polished media presence that combined legal credentials with political savvy. Her supporters praised her as a non-nonsense defender of traditional values, while critics accused her of prioritizing partisan politics over legal principles. "People want to see someone fighting for them," she once told a conservative radio host. "I don't go to Washington to make friends. I go to get results." Bondi's approach to congressional hearings was particularly confrontational. She treated witnesses from the opposing party like hostile witnesses in a criminal trial, interrupting answers she didn't like and dismissing expert testimony that contradicted her narrative. This aggressive style had become her trademark, earning her regular appearances on right-wing media and fundraising opportunities. With conservative groups behind her, confident television persona was a calculated political operator who understood the value of viral moments. Bondi had admitted to colleagues that confrontational exchanges generated the best clips for social media, calling them fundraising gold. Facing her in this explosive confrontation was Representative Jasmine Crockett, 43, representing Texas's 30th congressional district. Though only in her second term in Congress, Crockett had already established herself as a formidable presence on Capitol Hill, known for her exceptional legal mind and unflappable demeanor under pressure. Before entering politics, Crockett had built an impressive career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, handling complex constitutional cases and earning a reputation for meticulous preparation and courtroom effectiveness. A graduate of Rhodes College and the University of Houston Law Center, she had worked as both a public defender and in private practice, specializing in voting rights and criminal justice reform cases. Unlike many politicians who relied on staff-prepared talking points, Crockett brought the evidence-based approach of a trial attorney to every hearing. Her most notable legal victory had come in a landmark case challenging discriminatory practices in the Texas criminal justice system, where she successfully argued before the state's highest court. "The courtroom taught me that preparation beats performance every time," she often told her staff. "Anyone can put on a show, but the facts ultimately matter." Her district encompassed diverse communities in Dallas County, from some of the city's most affluent neighborhoods to areas struggling with economic challenges. This range gave Crockett first-hand insight into how policies affected people across economic and social spectrums. The hearing that brought these two powerful personalities into direct conflict concerned proposed voting rights legislation. The Republican majority had called the hearing to highlight alleged vulnerabilities in election systems, while Democrats sought to focus on voter suppression concerns. The stakes were high for both participants. For Bondi, the hearing represented an opportunity to generate compelling content for conservative media and demonstrate her value to the Republican leadership. For Crockett, it was a chance to defend principles she had spent her legal career fighting for, and to ensure the committee's record reflected factual reality. What neither anticipated was that their confrontation would transcend the specific policy disagreement and become a defining moment in congressional hearings, one that would force political operatives and viewers alike to reconsider the difference between performative conflict and substantive debate. The tension had been building throughout the morning session. The committee room was arranged in the classic congressional layout. Members seated at an elevated dais, witnesses at a table below them, and the audience and press corps behind. This physical arrangement was designed to emphasize the power dynamics at play, with lawmakers literally looking down on those they questioned. Behind the scenes, committee staffers were already anticipating fireworks. Several had observed Bondi reviewing documents on Crockett's legal background before the hearing, highlighting passages and preparing notes. "She's gunning for Crockett today," one Republican aide whispered to another. "She wants to put the former public defender in her place." The hearing began with Chairman James Thompson introducing the day's topic, election integrity and ballot security. After opening statements from the committee leadership, Bondi was recognized as special counsel to the majority, giving her the first opportunity to question witnesses. Bondi's initial questioning of the witnesses followed her usual pattern, interrupting answers she didn't like, dismissing expert testimony that contradicted her narrative, and presenting contested allegations as established facts. Her voice carried its familiar authoritative tone as she addressed a county election official from Arizona. "So, you're telling this committee that requiring voters to show ID somehow prevents eligible citizens from voting? That defies common sense," Bondi said, not waiting for a complete answer before continuing. "Americans need ID to buy cold medicine, board a plane, or open a bank account. Why should voting be different?" The witness began explaining research on disparate impacts of ID requirements, but Bondi cut him off. "I'll take that as confirmation that your opposition is political, not practical," she said, though the witness had suggested no such thing. This pattern continued through her questioning of the first panel of witnesses. When Crockett's turn for questions arrived, she focused on documented cases of voter suppression and the real-world impacts of restrictive voting laws. Her questioning was pointed but respectful, allowing witnesses to complete their answers. After the first panel concluded, the committee called its second panel of witnesses, including a representative from a conservative think tank who had published a controversial report on election security. During his testimony, he made several assertions about widespread irregularities in urban voting districts, specifically naming several cities in Crockett's state of Texas. When Crockett's questioning turn arrived again, she addressed these claims directly. "Mr. Roberts, I'd like to discuss the methodology of your report, particularly regarding the claims about Dallas County, which I represent," Crockett began. Your report states that 17,000 ballots were, quote, processed outside standard verification procedures. Could you explain how you arrived at that figure? The witness began a general explanation, but Crockett pressed for specifics. I'm asking about your data sources and methodology, not general concerns. As the witness struggled to provide concrete details, Bondi interrupted, although it wasn't her turn to speak. Mr. Chairman, the gentlewoman's time would be better spent addressing the serious issues raised rather than attacking the messenger, Bondi said. Chairman Thompson nodded. The gentlewoman is reminded to focus on the issues at hand. Crockett responded with measured precision. Mr. Chairman, examining the reliability of evidence presented to this committee is precisely the issue at hand. If we're making policy recommendations based on this report, understanding its methodology is essential. She turned back to the witness. Mr. Roberts, did your team review the actual ballot processing procedures in Dallas County before making this claim? We based our analysis on statistical patterns and information from local sources, the witness replied vaguely. Could you name those local sources? Crockett asked. The witness hesitated. Various poll workers and officials who expressed concerns. So, no official records or documents, just anecdotal reports, Crockett pressed. At this point, Bondi interrupted again more forcefully. Mr. Chairman, this line of questioning is clearly designed to intimidate the witness and discredit legitimate concerns about election integrity. Crockett responded calmly. I'm simply asking for the factual basis of claims made about my district. The chairman allowed Crockett to continue, but the pattern of interruption persisted throughout her questioning. Each time Crockett began to expose flaws in the witness's methodology, Bondi would interject with procedural objections or editorial comments. After several such interruptions, Crockett addressed the chairman directly. Mr. Chairman, it appears special counsel Bondi is not familiar with committee rules regarding member questioning periods. Perhaps she needs a refresher on basic congressional procedure. This subtle jab at Bondi's professionalism didn't go unnoticed. Several committee members glanced up from their papers, suddenly more interested in the exchange. Bondi's face flushed visibly as she leaned toward her microphone. Mr. Chairman, I've been practicing law since the Congresswoman was in high school. I don't need lectures on procedure from someone who's barely served 2 years in this body. The personal nature of the attack created an audible murmur in the hearing room. Even some Republican members looked uncomfortable with Bondi's tone. The chairman tapped his gavel lightly. Let's maintain decorum, please. Representative Crockett, please continue with your questions. Crockett nodded, her expression revealing nothing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. She turned back to the witness and continued her methodical questioning, highlighting several statistical impossibilities in his report without directly attacking him. As her questioning effectively dismantled the report's credibility, Bondi became increasingly agitated, passing notes to the chairman and whispering urgently to staff. When Crockett's time expired, Bondi immediately requested recognition from the chair. Mr. Chairman, I feel it's important to address some misleading statements we've just heard, Bondi said, her voice taking on an edge of frustration. Congresswoman Crockett's attempts to discredit this witness are typical of Democrats who want to ignore serious election vulnerabilities. She turned to face Crockett directly. Perhaps, if the Congresswoman spent more time addressing the concerns of voters and less time grandstanding for cameras, we could have a productive discussion about election integrity. This direct personal attack violated committee norms, where members typically address remarks to the chair, rather than directly confronting each other. Several Democratic members objected immediately. The chairman gave for order. Members will direct their comments to the chair, not to each other. Bondi nodded peremptorily, but continued her attack. Mr. Chairman, what we're seeing is a clear attempt to obstruct legitimate inquiry into election irregularities. This obstructionism comes from the same playbook Democrats have used for years to prevent common-sense election security measures. She held up a copy of the report Crockett had just questioned. This document contains serious findings that deserve consideration, not dismissal through procedural nitpicking. This characterization of Crockett's substantive methodological questions as procedural nitpicking seemed to trigger something in the Congresswoman. Crockett requested recognition from the chair, which was granted. "Mr. Chairman, I've practiced law in courtrooms across Texas where the rules of evidence actually matter," Crockett began, her voice calm but firm. "In those courtrooms, when someone presents a report making serious accusations, they're expected to have actual evidence, not anecdotes, not statistical manipulations, and certainly not anonymous sources." She held up a document of her own. "I have here the official election records from Dallas County for the period covered in Mr. Roberts' report. These records directly contradict the claims made about irregularities in my district. I'm happy to submit them for the record, if factual information is still of interest to this committee." Bondi scoffed audibly, a reaction caught by the committee room cameras. "Mr. Chairman, now we're supposed to trust the very officials whose conduct is in question. That's circular reasoning. What I'm offering are the official certified records," Crockett replied. "If Special Counsel Bondi has evidence of falsification, I'm sure the committee would be interested to see it. Otherwise, we're being asked to disregard official records in favor of a report that, when questioned about its methodology, offered no verifiable sources." Bondi's expression darkened as she realized Crockett was not only holding her ground, but effectively shifting the burden of proof back to the Republican side. "Mr. Chairman, this is exactly the kind of deflection." "Point of order, Mr. Chairman," Crockett interjected. "Is Special Counsel Bondi authorized to interrupt member questioning time repeatedly? I've reviewed the committee rules and can't find any provision granting special counsels this privilege." The procedural question forced the chairman to acknowledge the irregular nature of Bondi's interventions. The gentlewoman raises a valid point. Special Counsel Bondi is reminded that member questioning time is protected under committee rules. This small procedural victory seemed to further agitate Bondi, whose face had grown increasingly flushed. When the next Republican member yielded part of his time to Bondi, she used it to launch her most direct attack yet. "What we're witnessing today is typical of how Democrats approach election integrity," Bondi said, barely containing her anger. "They use their credentials to mislead the public, focus on irrelevant details to distract from the bigger picture, and ultimately prevent any meaningful discussion of serious problems." She looked directly at Crockett, disregarding the chairman's earlier warning. "And frankly, Congresswoman, your performance today is embarrassing. You're either deliberately misleading this committee, or you're woefully uninformed about how elections actually work in this country." The personal attack crossed a line that even some Republican members seemed uncomfortable with. The camera caught several glancing at each other with concern. One senior Republican on the committee leaned over to whisper something to the chairman, likely suggesting it was time to rein in the increasingly personal confrontation. Crockett requested recognition to respond. The chairman, perhaps hoping to defuse the situation, granted it. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, adjusting her microphone. "Before I respond to Special Counsel Bondi's remarks, I'd like to clarify my qualifications for the record." What followed was the response that would soon go viral across every social media platform and change the trajectory of the entire hearing. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice measured and clear, "since Special Counsel Bondi has questioned my understanding of election law and suggested I'm either misleading this committee or uninformed, I believe it's relevant to establish my credentials on this matter." The room fell silent as Crockett continued, maintaining perfect composure despite the personal attacks. "Before joining Congress, I litigated voting rights cases across Texas for over a decade. I've successfully argued before the Texas Supreme Court in cases directly concerning election procedures and voter accessibility. I've served as an election protection attorney in multiple election cycles, and I've authored amicus briefs in 2 Supreme Court cases on voting rights." She paused briefly, making eye contact with committee members on both sides of the aisle. "In addition, I've personally trained over 500 poll workers on election procedures and compliance with the Voting Rights Act. I've conducted formal studies of ballot rejection rates across demographic groups, and I've served as an official observer for the certification of election results in 3 different counties. Crockett then reached into her portfolio and removed a document. I also have here a letter from the former Secretary of State of Texas, appointed by a Republican governor, I should note, commending my work on a bipartisan election security task force in 2018. The strategic mention of her bipartisan work caused several Republican members to look up with interest. So when Special Counsel Bondi suggests, "I don't understand how elections actually work in this country," I'm left wondering which part of my experience she finds lacking. Crockett then pivoted masterfully from her qualifications to the substance of the debate. But more importantly, Mr. Chairman, this hearing shouldn't be about my credentials or Special Counsel Bondi's opinions of me. It should be about facts, evidence, and the actual experiences of American voters. She held up the report that had been the subject of earlier questioning. This report makes serious allegations about election procedures in several counties, including my own. When asked basic questions about methodology, data sources, and verification procedures, the author provided no substantive answers. Crockett then produced another document. I have here the certified election records from Dallas County, which directly contradict the claims made in this report. I also have affidavit from the election administrators of 3 other counties mentioned, all stating that the report's characterizations of their procedures are factually incorrect. The methodical presentation of evidence was having a visible effect on the committee and audience. Even journalists who had been half paying attention were now fully engaged, recognizing that something significant was happening. Mr. Chairman, I'm not asking the committee to simply take my word on these matters. I'm providing verifiable evidence and official records. That's how serious policy discussions should proceed, based on facts, not insinuations, on evidence, not anecdotes. She turned slightly toward Bondi, though still addressing her comments to the chair. And when we lack substantive arguments, we should not resort to personal attacks or questioning the intelligence and integrity of colleagues that doesn't serve the American people or the institutions we're sworn to protect. The contrast between Crockett's evidence-based approach and Bondi's increasingly personal attacks was becoming impossible to ignore. Several committee members who had been scrolling through their phones now gave Crockett their full attention. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address Special Counsel Bondi's characterization of my questions as procedural nitpicking. In both courtrooms and congressional hearings, procedures exist to ensure fairness, accuracy, and integrity. Dismissing these safeguards doesn't strengthen our democracy. It undermines it. Crockett placed all her documents neatly in a folder. I'm happy to provide copies of all these materials for the committee record, and I yield back the remainder of my time. The measured evidence-based response left the hearing room in a moment of stunned silence. It wasn't just what Crockett had said, but how she had said it without raising her voice, without responding in kind to personal attacks, and while providing substantive evidence that directly addressed the issues at hand. In the press section, reporters were already typing furiously on their laptops. One whispered to another, "That's going viral before this hearing even ends." The chairman, recognizing the significance of the moment, cleared his throat. "The materials offered by the gentlewoman will be accepted into the record. We'll now proceed with questioning." From Bondi interrupted, unable to let Crockett have the last word. "Mr. Chairman, I request time to respond to these misleading characterizations." The chairman hesitated, then nodded. The chair recognizes Special Counsel Bondi for 2 minutes. It was at this moment that Bondi made a critical error. Rather than addressing the substantive evidence Crockett had presented, she doubled down on personal attacks. What we just witnessed was a textbook example of using credentials to distract from substance, Bondi began, her voice betraying her agitation. Congresswoman Crockett can list her resume all day long, but it doesn't change the reality that Democrats consistently oppose common-sense measures to protect election integrity. Bondi shuffled through her papers, seemingly searching for something specific but unable to find it. This momentary disorganization contrasted sharply with Crockett's methodical presentation. The report being questioned has been widely cited by election experts, Bondi continued, though she offered no names of these experts. Just because the Congresswoman doesn't like its conclusions doesn't mean it lacks validity. A Democratic committee member interjected, "Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is the special counsel planning to address the specific evidence Congresswoman Crockett submitted to the record?" This procedural question highlighted the growing gap between Bondi's rhetorical attacks and Crockett's evidence-based approach. Bondi appeared increasingly flustered. "I'm addressing the broader context that's being ignored here," Bondi responded, her voice rising slightly. "If we get lost in minutiae and technicalities, we miss the forest for the trees." The characterization of official election records as minutiae and technicalities raised eyebrows even among some Republican members. One senior Republican congressman leaned back in his chair, a concerned expression on his face as he watched Bondi continue. "The American people know there are problems with our election system," Bondi insisted, her voice growing more forceful. "They don't need law review articles or court citations to understand what they can see with their own eyes. This appeal to anecdotal evidence over official records only served to reinforce the contrast Crockett had established. Bondi seemed to realize she was losing ground and attempted to pivot. "Furthermore," she continued, "the Congresswoman's selective presentation of evidence omits critical context that would paint a very different picture." When asked by another committee member what specific context was missing, Bondi spoke in generalities about national patterns and trends across multiple jurisdictions, but offered no specific rebuttal to the county-level evidence Crockett had presented. As Bondi's response continued to focus on broad accusations rather than specific evidence, the dynamic in the hearing room shifted noticeably. What had begun as a fairly standard partisan hearing had transformed into something much more significant, a clear demonstration of the difference between evidence-based discourse and rhetorical attacks. The chairman, sensing that Bondi's continued response was only weakening the majority's position, gently interrupted. "The special counsel's time has expired. We will now move to the next round of questioning." Bondi looked as if she wanted to object, but caught herself, perhaps finally recognizing that continuing the exchange would only do more damage. The camera caught her expression, a mixture of frustration and dawning realization that the exchange had not gone as planned. For the remainder of the hearing, the tenor of the discussion changed subtly but significantly. Republican members largely abandoned the more extreme claims from the questioned report, focusing instead on less controversial aspects of election administration. Several even made points of acknowledging the importance of verifiable evidence and procedural integrity, indirect acknowledgments of Crockett's effective framing. Democratic members, taking their cue from Crockett, focused their questions on specific evidence and documentation rather than broad political accusations. The result was a hearing that, while still marked by partisan differences, contained substantially more substantive policy discussion than most recent committee sessions. As the hearing concluded, journalists swarmed around Crockett in the hallway outside. One asked, "Congresswoman, did you anticipate that exchange with Special Counsel Bondi?" Crockett's response would become almost as widely shared as the hearing exchange itself. "I didn't anticipate the personal nature of her comments, but I've spent my career preparing to discuss election law with precision and evidence. In my experience, the facts speak for themselves when given the opportunity." Inside the hearing room, Bondi could be seen gathering her papers, her expression tense as she spoke with Republican staff members. The body language suggested a post-mortem discussion of an exchange that had clearly not gone according to plan. By the time both women left the Capitol that evening, clips of their exchange had already been viewed millions of times across social media platforms. What had begun as a routine committee hearing had become a viral moment that would reshape public perceptions of both Bondi and Crockett, and perhaps of political discourse itself. The aftermath of the Bondi-Crockett confrontation extended far beyond the confines of the committee room. Within hours, clips of the exchange had spread across every major social media platform, quickly becoming the most discussed political moment of the week. What made this particular exchange stand out wasn't just the conflict itself, but the stark contrast in approaches. Bondi's increasingly personal attacks versus Crockett's evidence-based responses. On Twitter, the hashtags Bondi Meltdown and Crockett Receipts trended nationally for nearly 2 days. Political commentators across the spectrum found themselves analyzing not just the substance of the voting rights debate, but the nature of political discourse itself. What we witnessed wasn't just a congressional exchange, but a masterclass in how to handle bad faith attacks, noted political analyst Rachel Maddow on her primetime show. Representative Crockett demonstrated that responding to personal attacks with substantive evidence is not only more effective, but more compelling television. Even conservative commentator Ben Shapiro, typically critical of Democratic lawmakers, acknowledged on his podcast, "Whatever you think about her politics, Crockett came prepared in a way few politicians do. She brought receipts, as the kids say. And that's something we should expect from all our representatives, regardless of party." The viral moment transformed Crockett's national profile overnight. Her social media followers increased by over 200,000 in the first 24 hours after the hearing. Her congressional office reported receiving more than 15,000 messages, not just from supporters, but from citizens across the political spectrum who appreciated her approach to political discourse. "I disagree with your position on voting laws," read one email from a self-described conservative voter in Nebraska. "But I respect how you conducted yourself in that hearing. You didn't dodge questions or resort to personal attacks. We need more of that kind of approach in our political discussions." For Bondi, the aftermath proved more complicated. Her initial response was to double down, appearing on several conservative media outlets to characterize Crockett as arrogant and elitist. These appearances, however, only served to keep the unflattering clips in circulation, as they were frequently played alongside Bondi's post-hearing comments. Conservative media reactions were notably mixed. While some outlets predictably defended Bondi, others expressed concern about the exchange's impact. One conservative columnist wrote, "Bondi's performance wasn't just ineffective, it was counterproductive. By resorting to personal attacks rather than substantive arguments, she allowed Crockett to claim both the moral and intellectual high ground." Perhaps most tellingly, several Republican members of the committee privately distanced themselves from Bondi's approach in conversations with congressional reporters. "That's not how we want to present our arguments," one Republican congressman told a Politico reporter off the record. "We have legitimate concerns about election procedures, but they get lost when the discussion devolves into personal attacks." The hearing exchange quickly became required viewing in political communication courses across the country. Georgetown University professor James Wilson added the complete video to his media studies curriculum, telling students, "This interaction demonstrates how prepared politicians can shift the dynamics of hostile exchanges away from personal conflict towards substantive discussion." Media training companies incorporated clips into their programs almost immediately. "This is a masterclass in how to handle hostile questioning," explained communications consultant David Chen in a viral LinkedIn post. "Notice how Representative Crockett never takes the bait to become emotional, consistently returns to factual information, and politely but firmly calls out unfair framing." The impact extended beyond media training to actual political behavior. Congressional communications directors reported receiving numerous requests from their bosses for Crockett-style prep before difficult interviews. One Democratic Senate communications director told The Washington Post, "Every member who saw that exchange is asking for more rigorous preparation with specific evidence and data points. They want to be able to respond the way Crockett did." Perhaps most surprisingly, the exchange appeared to have measurable effects on public perception of voting rights issues. A poll conducted the week after the hearing found that 62% of respondents who had seen clips of the exchange, reported being more interested in learning about the details of election administration than before, with 57% saying they were more likely to seek out primary sources rather than rely on political claims. These findings suggested that Crockett's evidence-based approach hadn't just won the moment, but might have shifted how some citizens approach political information more broadly. 3 days after the hearing, Bondi's approach received an implicit rebuke from an unexpected source. In a memo to Republican committee chairs, House Speaker Johnson emphasized the importance of substantive evidence-based questioning in congressional hearings, noting that our strongest position comes when we focus on factual evidence rather than personal characterizations. While the memo didn't mention Bondi by name, the timing and content left little doubt about what had prompted it. Several congressional reporters noted that the language, particularly the emphasis on evidence-based questioning, echoed Crockett's approach almost exactly. For Crockett personally, the aftermath included an invitation to deliver a guest lecture at Harvard Law School on evidence-based advocacy in political settings. The lecture, which was streamed online, attracted over 50,000 viewers, an unprecedented number for an academic legal presentation. And what we saw in that hearing wasn't just good politics, noted constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe in his introduction of Crockett. It was good lawyering applied to a political context, something we desperately need more of in our public discourse. Crockett used the Harvard platform not to spike the football on her viral moment, but to expand on the broader principles at stake. The exchange that's gotten so much attention wasn't about winning an argument, she explained. It was about protecting the integrity of our democratic processes through factual accuracy and procedural fairness. She continued, "When we allow political discourse to become detached from verifiable evidence, we don't just damage our institutions. We undermine citizens' ability to make informed decisions about issues that directly affect their lives." 6 months after the hearing, its influence continued to reverberate through political media. Network producers reported increased audience engagement with segments that featured detailed policy discussions supported by specific evidence. Several cable news programs had adjusted their formats to allow for more substantive policy analysis, finding that viewers responded positively to the changes. Perhaps the most telling indicator of the exchange's impact came nearly a year later, when Bondi and Crockett found themselves on opposite sides of another congressional hearing, this one concerning judicial nominations. Observers immediately noticed a significant difference in Bondi's approach. Gone were the personal jabs and dismissive characterizations. Instead, Bondi focused her questions on specific legal decisions and judicial philosophy, even directly citing case law and legal scholarship. When she disagreed with Crockett's positions, she did so by referencing alternative precedents and constitutional interpretations rather than questioning her colleagues' motives or intelligence. What you're seeing isn't just two people who learned from a previous encounter, observed veteran congressional reporter Carl Hulse. It's a recognition that substantive debate is ultimately more persuasive and, yes, more politically effective than personal attacks. The Bondi-Crockett confrontation had become more than a viral moment. It had helped catalyze a subtle but significant shift in how political discourse was conducted and consumed. Political communication textbooks began featuring the exchange as a case study in effective messaging, with one widely used college textbook including a chapter titled Evidence versus Emotion: The Changing Dynamics of Political Persuasion. For congressional staffers preparing their members for high-profile hearings, the exchange became a frequent reference point. We literally ask ourselves, is this a Bondi or a Crockett approach? One chief of staff told Roll Call, "It's shorthand for choosing between personal attacks and evidence-based arguments." The most significant legacy of the exchange, however, may have been its impact on public expectations for political discourse. Focus groups conducted by both parties found that voters increasingly expressed fatigue with purely partisan attacks and responded more positively to politicians who presented specific evidence for their positions. The viral nature of the Bondi Crockett exchange demonstrated something politicians have been slow to recognize. Noted political scientist Melissa Harris Perry. Viewers and voters are hungry for substance. They want representatives who come prepared with facts, not just feelings. As another election cycle approached, campaign consultants on both sides reported candidates requesting debate preparation that emphasized factual command and evidence-based responses rather than rehearsed attack lines. While negative campaigning certainly hadn't disappeared, there was a growing recognition that voters responded to substantive arguments in ways that traditional political wisdom had often underestimated. For journalism schools and communication departments, the exchange provided a valuable teaching tool, a clear demonstration that the most effective response to provocative questioning isn't matching fire with fire, but meeting heat with light. The contrast between Bondi's emotional escalation and Crockett's evidence-based responses offered a textbook illustration of different approaches to political communication and their relative effectiveness. What made this exchange so compelling wasn't just that Crockett won the moment, explained media studies professor Robert McChesney. It's that she did so by elevating the discussion rather than descending to the level of personal attacks. That's a lesson that transcends partisan politics. A year after the hearing, when asked about the exchange during a podcast interview, Crockett offered a perspective that encapsulated why the moment had resonated so widely. In that hearing, we weren't just debating voting procedures. We were demonstrating two different visions of how democracy functions. Do we make decisions based on evidence, expertise, and verifiable facts? Or do we surrender to whoever shouts the loudest or makes the most inflammatory claims? That's the choice we face, not just in congressional hearings, but as a society. As for Bondi, she too seemed to have absorbed the lesson of that fateful exchange. In a rare moment of public reflection during a conservative conference panel, she acknowledged that her approach had evolved. Looking back, I realized that the strongest argument is always the one backed by specific evidence, Bondi admitted. When we focus too much on personalities, we risk losing sight of the policies that actually matter to Americans. This acknowledgement, coming from someone known for her combative style, highlighted just how significantly the viral moment had shifted the landscape of political communication. Media scholars would later identify the Bondi Crockett exchange as a turning point in congressional hearings, the moment when substantive evidence began to reclaim its primacy over theatrical confrontation. While political grandstanding certainly hadn't disappeared from American politics, a new premium had been placed on preparation, precision, and factual command. As another election cycle approached, with all its inevitable controversy and partisan division, the exchange remained a powerful reference point, a demonstration that how we disagree can be just as important as what we disagree about, and that in capable hands, a hostile confrontation can become an opportunity to elevate political discourse rather than degrade it. If you found this breakdown of this historic confrontation illuminating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses of the moments that are reshaping American political discourse. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our coverage of these pivotal exchanges that reveal the true nature of public debate in America today. This is how real political literacy develops, not through shouting matches, but through understanding the tactics used to frame debates and the most effective ways to respond to them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.